Why, hello there, my fine feathered friends. How's it going, guys? Welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each week we take a deep dive into one or two specific character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. We theory craft about them, we crunch numbers, and we do our best to find ways to make that character particularly strong in combat in D&D for the role that you've chosen to have them play in-game. My name's Colby, and I'm super happy to have you, so thanks for being here, and welcome. If you enjoy the character creation part of D&D almost as much, or maybe even more, than playing the actual game, welcome home. This is where you belong, and we're thrilled that you are here. So again, thank you. Before I get into the episode today, as usual, I have a bit of a preamble. And I want to talk about some game theory ideas around tanking in Dungeons & Dragons. Tanking, or a tank being, a character that's difficult to kill. But it's more than that, right? So let's discuss briefly. We've done this a little bit in my other tank episodes, but I want to take a little deeper dive really quick here today. So what makes a good tank in Dungeons & Dragons? I think essentially a tank, when we think of what a tank is, they do two things. One, they are hard to kill, right? They're very survivable. But two, they keep their friends from taking damage. They protect their allies, oftentimes simply by drawing enemy fire to them, since they are so hard to kill. But there are other ways that you can kind of protect and defend your allies in the campaign. And that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Those two aspects that really make a good tank. Now, what we're going to measure in this episode and in all the episodes that I do when I look at a tank build is how hard are you to kill? Because that's more easily quantifiable than how good are you at, keeping your friends from taking damage. It's pretty hard to quantify. I'm a 17. It's not as easy to crunch those numbers. But I like to quantify things, as you well know. So throughout this build, there will be times when you have to make a choice. Do I use a spell or take an action or a reaction that makes me hard to kill? If yes, sometimes that might prevent you from doing a good job at keeping your friends safe and keeping them from taking damage. And if at the end of the day, all you're doing is making yourself hard to kill, you're only fulfilling sort of half of what a tank is, right? You're not, frankly, being a very good tank. Of course, there are many ways to try and protect your allies. There are spells you can cast, actions, bonus actions, reactions you can take to protect them. Another way that you can try to protect them is just by being a threat on the battlefield, right? Maybe you do a decent amount of damage, and so the monsters want to take you out because you're a threat. Maybe you heal and support your allies really well, and so the monsters want to take you out because you're making their life miserable, right? So keep these things in mind as we discuss the choices that we make, and understand that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, going after item number one, survivability, may come at the cost of item number two, helping to kind of protect your friends. We're going to explore, as always, the limits of what's possible as far as how survivable can this character be, because like I've said, it's just easier to quantify. But in terms of actual in-game practice, you will very often want to sacrifice some of the difficulty to kill aspect in order to be better at protect my friends, right? Quick example, there are times when you'll have access to something that will give your enemies disadvantage when they attack you. That definitely increases your survivability, but there's a chance that because your enemies have disadvantage to attack you, your DM might decide that the monster is going to go after a different target who's maybe a little easier to hit, right? And the problem is, I can't know what your DM is going to do in that situation. Are they going to metagame it and, just kind of be like, well, you're too hard to hit, so this monster is going to go after somebody else? Or are they, is your DM an equal opportunity attacker who likes to distribute, monster aggression evenly and equally? I don't know. maybe, of course, maybe you'll be the only viable option for the monster because nobody else is nearby or whatever. But again, these are all things that are difficult for me to know. Regardless, as I've said, I'm always going to assume when I crunch the numbers that you are using the option that gives you the best survivability. You might not always want to do that in game. Let's explore what's possible, and then you can make informed decisions about where you want to scale back on your survivability in order to do a better job at helping your friends with their own survivability, because after all, that is what you are doing here. So, a wizard tank. Some of you may be like, yeah, that's totally normal and not surprising at all. And some of you may be like, that seems like an oxymoron, right? Some of you might say, yeah, wizard tank, you already did that, Bladesinger. And while it's true that Bladesingers can be pretty survivable, between mirror image, they're pretty high armor class, that they can get up to, they can be pretty tough to kill. Having played a couple of them in different campaigns now, I can attest to that. They don't, though, have a really great way of kind of protecting their allies and keeping their allies safe, which is the second important part of being a tank, right? Outside, I suppose, of doing pretty good damage and thereby killing monsters and making the monsters want to take them out because they're doing pretty good damage and they're a big threat on the battlefield. That is a form of protecting your allies. A dead monster does 0 damage. Again, while that does make an effective character, I don't think it really fits the tank role that we're going for here, who is sort of actively looking for ways to defend and protect their allies. I think it might be the best tank build that I've done to date. So, without any further ado, I present the Abjuration Wizard Tank. Let's jump into the build. All right, at level 1, for class, we are actually going to start with Artificer. When we first meet our champion, they are a magical tinkerer. They're interested in constructing and infusing magical objects using their keen intellect and tools. We get a lot of really important things from a few levels in Artificer here, not least of which is the fact that Artificers start with proficiency in their Constitution saving throws, which will be important for us to resist certain things, spell effects and things, but of course also for our concentration saves. So not only that, I just really like starting the story for this character here, and it'll make a little bit more sense as we go along. As for your race, that most troubling of all choices. Fortunately, we don't care about elven accuracy, so at least we can avoid that debate for once. I'm going to talk about 3 options. Variant Human, the Satyr or Yuan-Ti Pureblood option, that's one option, pick one of those, or Warforged. You guys know I love free feats, and there are quite a few actually that I would like to have for this build. However, I think the most important one, in my opinion, I can't get yet because I don't meet the prerequisite. So, that makes Variant Human a little less appealing. And of course, custom lineage, I guess I'd lump in with Variant Human there. Let's see, advantage on saving throws against spells. That's the primary reason why you'd want to go Satyr or Yuan-Ti Pureblood, right? That's fantastic for any tank build, for any character really, but especially for someone who's focused on staying alive. However, this build is going to get a fair number of ways to counter and reduce damage from lots of spells and spell effects. So I'm personally a little less drawn to that myself. Not only that, but eventually we will get advantage against spells and resistance to spell damage. It doesn't come until very, very late, but it is a little bit redundant if you're playing the character into late game. So again, slightly less appealing for that reason for me. That leaves us with Warforged, a race that I have previously never used in a build before. Warforged are fantastic for tank builds, right? They get lots of goodies. Advantage against and resistance to poison damage. That really helps our survivability. They are immune to disease, fantastic for our survivability, and they start with a +1 armor class. Now, your DM might not allow Eberron stuff, but if they do, this is the one that I think gets my highest recommendation. I love the idea, first of all, as an artificer, I love the idea of a magical construct sort of starting their life as a creator of other magical constructs, right? They are, they're trying to get at the heart of the question, who am I? Or what is life? In some potentially interesting philosophical ways, I think. For reals, having a high AC for this class is super important. I mean, it is for all tanks, but maybe even extra important, I think, for this particular build. So, Warforged it is. Abilities. Assuming, as always, that we're doing point buy, I'm going to recommend, starting with a 14 intelligence and then taking your racial +2 there. So you get a 16 intelligence, a 15 constitution with your racial +1, so 16 again, a 14 charisma, which we will need, and a 12 dexterity, because every little bit helps when you are talking about dexterity saving throws. We don't have a particularly good one, and we're going to kind of want that sometimes. So anyway, as far as equipment goes, I would just do the gold buy option so that you could start with scale mail armor, that's medium, armor, and a shield, which even though artificers are proficient in shields, they don't typically start with one if you just take standard equipment. So go with gold buy. And then, of course, all of your other necessities that you need, you should have enough money to get you there. As far as what artificers get at level 1, magical tinkering is fantastic for flavor and roleplay, and I'm not going to get into it, but check it out if you're unfamiliar with what it is. And then we do get spell casting, and we get some spells, a couple of cantrips and a couple of first level spells. You don't have great martial ability currently, so plan on using spells for your offense for the first couple of levels. Basically, we just want to stay alive here. Pick up Firebolt probably for range, Shocking Grasp, or maybe Poison Cloud or something. Poison Spray for close-up. I would be sure to pick up Absorb Elements as a first level spell. That will be handy throughout our character's life. Again, you can cast it as a reaction, and it gives you resistance to fire, lightning, acid, cold, thunder damage, something like that. Elemental damage, which is fantastic for survivability, and then it, of course, also lets you do extra damage on your next turn in the form of a d6 of that type of damage, or more if you upscale it. And I'd probably pick up Cure Wounds, because it's nice to have a heal in a pinch. At level 2, we get infusions. And this is another one of the main reasons why we're here, though only one of them. You now get to imbue mundane items and make them magical, just like your Warforged self, Dr. Frankenstein. You can't use any infusions more than once, and no item can hold multiple infusions. 4 infusions, but you can only have 2 items infused at a time right now. Well, forever, because we're not going to take too many artificer levels. For right now, I would suggest taking the enhanced armor infusion, which gives you a +1 to your AC. You can put it on your armor or your shield. I'd put it on your shield. I'll explain why later. So now, by the way, your armor class is 14 for scale mail, +2 for your shield, +1 for your dexterity, +1 for that infusion, and +1 for your Warforged self. So you have a 19 armor class right now, which is really pretty good for a level 2 character. The other infusion, for right now anyway, I'd probably do Arcane Focus. It gives your spell attacks a +1 to hit. We'll be swapping that soon. But and you can swap out these infusions after a long rest. At level 3, Artificer Specialist. So artificers get their subclass at level 3, and for our specialist specialization, we are going armorer. We get so much from armor. It is almost impossible to make a different choice when we're trying to be a good intelligence-based tank. First up, we get arcane armor. It gives us proficiency with heavy armor, which is huge. We can turn a suit of armor into our arcane armor. And when we do that, it lets us ignore any strength requirements that armor may have. Huge. It keeps this build from being mad, multiple ability score dependent. Then we get to choose the armor's model, either Guardian or Infiltrator. Guardian obviously helps us be more tanky, more survivable. Infiltrator lets us be better at stealth and some ranged attack things. The cool thing is we can change between the two forms after a short rest. Obviously, most of the time we're going to be wanting to go Guardian, but it'll be nice to have Infiltrator model in a pinch. Guardian gives us a number of things. It gives us Thunder Gauntlets, so each of your gauntleted fists now count as a simple weapon that we're proficient with, and it does a d8 of damage. And it uses our intelligence to hit. So again, now we don't have to rely on strength in order to make our attacks, and or for wearing armor. So big benefits there for us, and we can just really focus on bumping our intelligence if we can ever get around to it. Anyway, gives us some good martial capabilities. So keep in mind, at this level now, you're going to want to switch the infusion from the arcane focus to enhanced weapon, which gives our weapon, our gauntlet here in this case, a +1 to hit and damage. Oh, and it gets better. Since this is both a weapon and our empty gloved hand, there's no reason, in my opinion, why we shouldn't be able to consider this hand empty for somatic components for casting spells. And also our armor, as an armor, counts as our spell casting focus. So that will keep us from having to pay the Warcaster tax, right? If you're gonna have a shield, which we have, and a weapon, your hands full, then without the Warcaster feat, you can't cast spells that have somatic components unless you have a free hand, right? I'm sure some of you may want to argue that because it's a weapon, it counts as having your hands full. Let's have that argument in the comments, I suppose. I have a hard time believing that there are many DMs out there that wouldn't say that, yeah, if you have a glove on your hand, you can still do somatic components. But anyway, let me just say, of course, Warcaster is still great, right? It lets you do some things, gives you advantage on your concentration checks, lets you cast a spell as an opportunity attack if you get one. I mean, there are still reasons to get Warcaster, and if you really love it and want it, go for it. I like not having to take the feat personally, especially since we're proficient with our Constitution saves. It makes Warcaster a little less important, in my opinion. But wait, there's more. When you hit somebody with this Thunder Gauntlet fist, they now have disadvantage on attacks against anyone but you until your next turn. So this is so important for tanks. Again, remember our conversation at the beginning, right? This is a fantastic way to do what I like to call a soft taunt, or really make it more attractive for the enemy to attack you as opposed to, anybody else. So that's fantastic. And we're still not done. As a bonus action with the Armorer, we can gain temporary hit points equivalent to our level in this class, which is 3 proficiency bonus times per day. Okay, fine, that's not super amazing since we're actually not taking any more Artificer levels after this, but still, it'll be nice in a pinch. We'll get a little bit of mileage out of it once in a while. So now, our magical construct is inhabiting a magical construct. If we're not careful, this could cause problems for the space-time continuum and the universe could implode. I can't believe how strong the Armorer is. As an intelligence-based tank, like I said, I think we'd be crazy to pass up all of those goodies that you get for 3 little levels. Such a great bump to our AC, a soft taunt, intelligence for our attack, and for having, for wearing our armor. I mean, there's just so many things. A free hand, essentially, so we don't need Warcaster. Just, it's really, really strong. But at level 4, we are going to start our journey into wizarding. So our Dr. Frankenstein has decided that they are becoming increasingly interested in the arcane itself. They want to do more than simply create magical constructs out of mundane ones. They want to explore and understand the very essence of the arcane itself. Primarily in the interest of protecting others. They feel that this is what they were made for. This is their purpose, right? So we are taking wizard levels, and at level 1 wizard, we get Arcane Recovery, which is fantastic. Once per long rest, it lets you, on a short rest, recover spell slots, right? Which is really great way to get some spell slots back once per day. We also get, of course, first level spells and cantrips. For cantrips, make sure you get Booming Blade and or Green Flame Blade. You're only getting 1 attack per turn, at least for the moment, and we want it to hurt as much as possible. So again, with Booming Blade, you make a weapon attack, and then if the attack hits, you'll do extra damage to them. You sheathe them in energy, and if they move on their turn, they're going to take extra damage. And in a moment, we are going to do extra damage on the hit itself. Green Flame Blade is kind of similar, except for that instead of sheathing them in that energy and then they take damage if they move, it just bounces to a nearby target and does a little extra damage to the nearby target. The thing that I love especially about Booming Blade is that it really encourages your target to stay put and not move and maybe go after one of your friends who's a little easier to hit. It doesn't force them to stay, but if they move, they're going to take damage and they're going to take an opportunity attack, and that's just a little bit like, okay, fine, I'll stay here. So that's great for us trying to fill our tank role, right? I also like Lightning Lure for a cantrip. It's great. You basically throw a leash of lightning out and try and pull an enemy towards you, ideally away from one of your enemies or into your attack range on your turn, kind of thing, on your next turn, I should say. Make sure that you get the shield spell, of course, as any good tank that has access to this spell should be using it often. So as a reaction, it lets you essentially, if you get hit by an attack, it lets you cast shield as a reaction and raise your armor class by 5, potentially causing the attack to miss you. It is an abjuration spell, so it will, fill that role for our bubble, which I'm going to talk about right now. So at level 5, we are a wizard 2. And we get our Arcane Tradition, our wizard subclass. And we are, of course, going with the Abjuration tradition. The School of Abjuration emphasizes magic that blocks, banishes, or protects. It is exactly what we want. It is perfect for us. So the first thing that we get as an Abjuration wizard is, I think, the most important, and I just alluded to it. It is our Arcane Ward. Whenever we cast an Abjuration spell, we get this ward. Think of it like a barrier, a magical barrier that has hit points equal to twice our wizard level plus our intelligence modifier. So right now that's, 7, right? It lasts until we take a long rest. So you cast it, I guess the first time you cast an Abjuration spell, you get this ward, and it just lasts for the whole day. Anytime we take damage, the ward takes damage instead and first. When it gets reduced to 0 hit points, it doesn't disappear. It's still kind of there, but we take any damage that it didn't absorb at that point. But then from that point on, anytime we cast an Abjuration spell, the ward gets replenished a little bit. It's not to the same level, it's just at that point it gets replenished by twice the level of the spell that we cast. So a level 1 spell, it just is a 2 hit point ward. A level 2 spell is a 4 hit point ward, right? Let's see. Now, there are a few mechanical things that we need to be aware of here that will influence our decisions and how the numbers work. First off, as per a Jeremy Crawford ruling, the ward does not benefit from any damage resistance that we may have. So if we are resistant, say, to fire damage because we cast Absorb Elements, when an enemy shot a fireball at us, the ward that was formed upon us casting that spell will take full damage from the fireball, right? Assuming we take damage. Well, we will, because we'll say even if we make our dex save, we'll take some damage, right? The ward will take full damage, and then any damage that's left over, we will take half damage on because we are resistant to it thanks to the Absorb Elements spell. For that reason, not getting hit is a lot more important to us than finding ways to stack damage resistance. So getting advantage against spells and having a high armor class are more valuable even than they otherwise would be, I think. At level 6, at this point in our hero's career, their delving into the arcane has attracted the attention of an otherworldly being. Maybe out of curiosity, or maybe because they were tricked, our hero enters into a pact with that otherworldly being in exchange for additional power. But they either quickly realize their mistake and seek nothing further from the otherworldly being, or they decide that what they were given in power works for them and they don't need any more after this initial agreement. So I want to take a single level into Warlock here, really for one reason and one reason only, and it is the Armor of Agathis spell, as some of you are probably predicting. It's a Warlock-only spell. Well, okay, Oath of Conquest Paladins get it, but it doesn't make sense for us to go 3 levels into Paladin, I think. So I love this spell for this build. It's so good. You don't have to do this, obviously. You might not think it's worth it, or you or your DM might not be happy with the idea of taking 3 classes in a single character, right? That's totally fine. If Magic Initiate would let us do more than cast this spell once per day at the lowest level, then I would just take that feat and call it good. But I really want this spell. And, we also get some nice things from a dip into Warlock, so let's talk about those first. First off, we get another worldly patron, our Warlock subclass. And you know what? I don't really care too much about what you take. You want a little healing ability? Go Celestial Patron. If you want to charm or cause fear amongst your enemies once in a while, which, those things are great because it will potentially keep your allies safe. Fear, if an enemy is feared, then they have disadvantage on their attacks as long as you are in their line of sight. And that will definitely help keep your allies safe, so that's a great one. So you'd go Archfey if you wanted that. If you want to do more damage, a little more damage once per turn, go Genie. You want to get another source of occasional temporary hit points, go Fiend. I'm not going to account for any of those things when I'm crunching numbers. Make a pact with the being that you think works best for your story. So let's talk spells. First of all, as far as the mechanics go, Warlocks have fewer spell slots than other spellcasting classes. At first level, they only have 1 spell slot. That's a bummer. But it refreshes on a short rest instead of a long rest, so hooray. Keep in mind that they don't interact, essentially, with the total spell slots that your character gets as a multi-classer, right? Right now, with 3 levels of Artificer and 2 levels of Wizard, you have spell slots as though you were a 3rd level multi-class spellcaster, right? That means 4 first level spell slots and 2 second level spell slots, even though you haven't learned any second level spells yet. You can upcast your first level spells using the second level spell slot. Those spell slots, of course, all reset on a long rest. And then kind of over to the side here, you've got 1 little Warlock spell slot that doesn't mingle and it resets on a short rest, right? And you can use Warlock spells. You can cast Warlock spells with your other spell slots, and you can cast Wizard and Artificer spells with your Warlock spell slot, only first level, of course. But yeah, you can use the spell slots for the spells. They just don't intermingle. Capiche? Okay. Now, as I've said, the only spell that I'm really going to talk about here that I care the most about is Armor of Agathis. This spell is fantastic for us. So you cast it, and it gives you a protective field of magic, manifesting as a spectral frost that covers you. You gain 5 temporary hit points, and if a creature hits you while you have these temporary hit points, they take 5 cold damage. No roll, no saving throws, they just take 5 damage, unless they're resistant or immune to cold damage, I guess. It's an action to cast the spell. It does not require concentration. And every level you upcast it at, it gives you 5 more temporary hit points and does 5 more damage when you get hit by an attack. To maximize its effectiveness, we want to make sure that we keep our arcane ward up at all costs so that we can keep those temporary hit points granted by Armor of Agathis, and then when the enemy hits us, they'll take that extra cold damage, right? Because the way it works is that if you get hit and you have both this Armor of Agathis and your ward up, the ward takes damage first, right? And then the temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis takes damage, and then finally you take damage. I love the synergy that we've got going on now here. You cast Armor of Agathis on yourself, and you gain 5 temporary hit points. Since, actually, you know what? We cast it at the 2nd level, so we get 10 temporary hit points. Since it's an Abjuration spell, you also, at this level, gain an Arcane Ward with 7 hit points. On your next turn, you hit a creature with a Booming Blade attack, causing some decent damage, because we're at level 5 here, at level 5, right, the Booming Blade does an extra 1d8 of damage even just on the initial attack. So you do some decent damage, and now you're encouraging them not to move, also giving them disadvantage if they attack anyone but you. So now they're really encouraged to attack you, right? And so if and when they do attack you, they either miss, hooray, or they hit you and take a bunch of damage for doing so, hooray. You're setting up a fantastic win-win situation for you, and a, damned if you do, damned if you don't for the monster. And I love that. So let's do our first damage report. Again, for those who have not seen one of my tank builds in the past, we calculate 2 groups of numbers here when we're talking tank builds. So there's damage taken per round, DTPR, and rounds to die, or RTD. We put ourselves up against like a couple of control fights here, a boss fight, an average typical encounter, and then a theoretical barrage of endless fireballs. These are all theoretical. They're not really meant to simulate, how an actual combat might go in game. It just helps us quantify things and, compare and contrast these different tank builds to one another. So at level 6, you have a 16 Constitution, you have a fairly humble 49 hit points, plus 17 from your Armor of Agathis and Arcane Ward if you cast Armor of Agathis as a 2nd level spell, which you should. Now, once your ward gets popped, right, you still have 6 other spell slots to be casting Shield, Absorb Elements, and Armor of Agathis, again, potentially, which all will replenish your ward back up to 4 if you cast it as a 2nd level spell, 2 if you cast it as a 1st level spell. This gets a little tricky to calculate, but I'm just going to assume that you're using all of those spell slots in a given encounter to continue replenishing your Arcane Ward. So that would give us a total of 14 additional hit points for our ward. And then all of those things together, our max hit point total here would be 80 at level 6, which is very nice. I'm also going to assume that by now you have managed to secure yourself some plate mail armor, not too big of an ask by level 6, I don't think. So that would give us an 18 armor class for the plate mail, plus our shield, which is 2 more, plus our Warforged bonus of +1, plus your infusion on your shield or armor, for a grand total of 22 AC. And then, of course, we do have the shield spell available to us when we need it, and several spell slots to potentially use it. So I'm fine calling your AC an on-demand 27, which is what it would be if you used your shield spell, okay? Like I've done with my other tank builds thus far that have access to that shield spell. So, against a boss fight, the control boss fight here was a young white dragon. That young white dragon would, on average, do 4 damage per round to us. So we have a DTPR of 4, and our rounds to die would be 20. It would take 20 rounds for us to die at that rate, and that's double the previous most survivable tank build that I had done thus far. It was the Tankadon for this fight. The average encounter was just against 4 berserkers, and it's the same, 4 DTPR and 20 rounds to die. A smaller lead here against the previous best in class, but still significantly better. And then against a 14 DC level 3 endless fireball barrage, you would take 14 DTPR and you would be dead in 6 rounds. And yes, I am assuming that you have absorb elements against the fireball and tried to account for the fact that the ward wouldn't benefit from that resistance like we talked about, okay? So yes, we are a little weaker against spells, especially at the moment, but that should change shortly. You may notice that I got rid of the 10 kobolds encounter because doing 4 control fights just seemed like too much, and that one was a little silly. Check the Master Tank comparison graph in the video description if you want to kind of look at how this fares compared to other tank builds that I've done. But again, it is significantly more survivable than any build that I've done to date, and it's only going to get better. At level 7, we are a Wizard 3. We're going back to Wizard, and we're staying there for the rest of our lives. You finally get some second level spells, and I will just mention a couple for tanking purposes. Warding Wind, among other things, gives ranged attacks disadvantage against us and anyone within 10 feet of us, and also dissipates potentially noxious and harmful gases and clouds. It can be a great way to protect yourself and your friends from harm. You're up against a bunch of ranged weapon attackers and things. Also, Blur. This is one that you're going to want to think twice about using, right? But it's great for our survivability. So it's concentration for 1 minute. As long as the enemy doesn't have blind sight or true sight or something, they have disadvantage when they try to attack you. Again, great for our survivability. Potentially not so great for trying to encourage your enemies to attack you and not your squishy friend that's standing, 15 feet away. Again, I don't know how much your DM is going to metagame you here. Does the enemy know that they have disadvantage on attacking you? Probably. They can see you looking all shifty. I don't know. Do they know, for that matter, they're going to take damage if they hit you from your Armor of Agathis? And or if they move, that they're going to take booming blade damage. These are all things that you're going to want to talk with your DM about and say, this is what I'm trying to create. How do you imagine this happening in game? What kinds of things do I need to kind of be aware of? And of course, just observe enemy tactics and, adjust your own tactics accordingly. If you're the last one standing, especially, of course, having Blur up with your incredibly high on-demand armor class is going to make you almost impossible for most monsters at this level to hit. That most of them will have to roll 2 natural 20s because they're rolling with disadvantage, right? To even land a hit. And chances are that if they did, you'd absorb most or all of that damage anyway. So at level 8, you are a Wizard 4. We finally get our first ability score increase and or feat. And there are so many to choose from here. I'm going to mention 3 that are specifically kind of for tankiness, right? Shield Master, Tough, and Heavy Armor Master. So Tough will give us 2 more hit points per level. No brainer. More hit points are always good. Shield Master is one that requires a little more thought, I think. So it lets you shove a creature 5 feet if you take the attack action, which at least right now we're probably never doing because Booming Blade is not taking the attack action. It's casting a spell that just so happens to make a weapon attack when you do it, right? But it also lets you add your shield's AC bonus to dex saves if the thing that you're saving against targets only you. Now, by the way, this is the reason that we put the infusion on our shield, just in case you ended up taking Shield Master at some point. The problem, though, here is that, again, it only lets you have that advantage if the thing only targets you, right? So there aren't that many spells, at least, that do that. Disintegrate, Sacred Flame, a few others. But you don't get to add that bonus to your dex save for area of effect stuff like Fireball, right? And that stinks. It makes it much less appealing a feat, I think. Now, if you do have to make a dex save to take half damage, whether it's area effect or something else, you can take no damage if you make the save. And that's really great. The problem is our dex save is really crappy. It's +1, right? If you had some way to get advantage against spell saving throws, I guess, Satyr would have been great for that. Or you had a higher dex, or a higher dex save at least. I think Shieldmaster would be worth taking here. But as is, I just don't feel like it does a ton of good for us right now. And so that leaves us with my favorite here, Heavy Armor Master. Why Heavy Armor Master? So with the Heavy Armor Master feat, all bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons, and yes, that's a caveat, but to be honest with you, the vast majority of monsters do not use magical weapon attacks when they attack you. They exist, but they're pretty rare. It reduces damage from those sources by 3, just a flat 3. That might not seem like a lot, but you actually do get a lot of mileage out of that, especially with this build. So keep in mind that our Armor of Agathis only does damage, right? Returns damage to our attacker if we have the temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis up. And that also keep in mind that first your Arcane Ward is going to take damage, and then the Armor of Agathis temporary hit points get taken out, and then you take damage. So as far as everything I've been able to read would indicate, the flat damage reduction from Heavy Armor Master would in fact be applied first before you account for damage to your Arcane Ward. Unlike resistance, like we talked about earlier, right? Before I mentioned that even if you have resistance to damage, doesn't matter. Arcane Ward takes full damage and then. But apparently, as far as I can tell, as far as everything that I've read, this 3 damage from Heavy Armor Master would reduce the damage to even the Arcane Ward. And if that bubble still gets popped, then you still have your temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis. So it just really helps ensure that those temporary hit points remain in place, increasing both our survivability, but also the damage that we're doing in return to the monster that's attacking us. And that damage is getting significant. If we cast it at a 3rd level spell, that's 15 flat damage when we get hit, as long as we have those temporary hit points up. So that's why I really love Heavy Armor Master at this point. Okay, level 9. We are a Wizard 5. And we finally get 3rd level spells. This is a big milestone for us. There are 2 spells that I want to highlight here for tankiness, but before I do, let's just pause for a moment and remind ourselves of something. Even though we are a tank, and a very good one at that, don't forget that we are still a wizard. We get Fireball here and Lightning Bolt, right? And you should absolutely be throwing out a Fireball on occasion or a Lightning Bolt when the occasion calls for it. You see a bunch of enemies grouped up or lined up in a nice little row there, throw it out there. Or later on, Force Wall to section off half of the enemies while you take out the other half, or animate objects for lots of great sustained damage per round, right? Or disintegrate later on. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. This is why we wanted to make a wizard tank, right? If you want to just be hard to kill and have a shield and bonk stuff with a weapon, there's plenty of other options out there for you. We want to be hard to kill and freaking rain down fire on our enemies when the situation calls for it. So that's why we went with an Abjuration Wizard. Thank you very much. So anyway, we now have a new concentration spell that we'll be using, and that we'll probably be using for the rest of our career. And it is Haste. Haste is so perfect in so many ways for us. It lasts for a minute. It doubles our move speed, lets us get around the battlefield more, gives us advantage on dexterity saving throws. That's very important for us and very useful. And it gives us an additional action on our turn. That action can only be used to take the attack action, and it only gives us 1 weapon attack in that situation. It lets us dash, lets us disengage, hide, or use an object. Don't forget the downside. When it ends, possibly if if our concentration gets broken, but regardless, when it ends, if a minute's up, we can't move or take actions until our next turn. So that's a big bummer. The risk is well worth the reward. And I forgot to mention, it also increases our armor class by 2. So this is just perfect. So we never did get extra attack, and we're not going to. At least I'm not planning on it. And this now lets us, as our action, cast Booming Blade and make a weapon attack, and then as our hasted one weapon attack action, attack potentially, ideally, another target, a second target, thereby giving 2 targets disadvantage on attacks against anyone but us. So that's just another fantastic way for us to increase our the way that we protect our allies, right? Or we could use our regular action to throw out a different spell. Fireball, Cure Wounds if somebody's going down, or on ourselves for that matter. Armor of Agathis if it's expired, and then still make an attack action to try and impose disadvantage on a target. Now keep in mind, you can take that second action in the same turn that you cast haste spell. You cast haste as your action, and now you have an extra action, right? So you open combat with haste and then make a single weapon attack granted by the haste spell. It is beautiful and perfect, and it is good to be a wizard. The other 3rd level spell that is very, very important for us to have here is Counterspell. This will be our best protection against enemy spellcasters, at least right now, and really throughout the game, I think. It costs our reaction, so of course we won't have it available if we have previously burned our reaction by casting a shield spell or absorb elements or something. And it is a 3rd level spell slot, so of course if you don't have any 3rd level spell slots, you also won't have it available. If you're going up against an enemy spellcaster, I would strongly encourage you to hold onto your reaction until you see them cast a spell, particularly if you know it's a dangerous one, right? And so you can counter it. Even if it means taking a little damage from, a melee attack that you might have been able to prevent with a shield spell or something. We're much less afraid of physical damage here than we are an enemy lightning bolt or something. So for those who don't know, Counterspell, the way it works is if the enemy casts a 3rd level spell or lower as a reaction, you can use Counterspell and just snuff it out. No saving throw, nothing. It's just poof. No spell for them. If it's a 4th level spell or higher, then you have to make an intelligence check, essentially, to see if you counter it. And the difficulty check, the DC, is 10 plus the spell level that you're trying to counter. So if it's a 4th level spell, it would be a 14 DC, right? You can upcast Counterspell if you have a spell slot for it, and then, if you're counterspelling as a 4th level, it will snuff out 4th level spells and lower. As a 5th level spells and lower, etc. And it's an Abjuration spell, so it fills our Arcane Ward up nicely if our Arcane Ward is out of hit points. Incredibly, incredibly useful and powerful for us. 9th level Damage Report. So we now have 3 3rd level spell slots, 3 2nd level spell slots, 5 1st level spell slots, counting our Warlock slot, right? Assuming that we use a 3rd level spell slot to cast Armor of Agathis on ourselves, and then the rest of our spell slots to fill up our Arcane Ward. When it's depleted, we'll have 15 temporary hit points from Armor of Agathis, 47 hit points to our ward, plus 70 regular hit points for a total of 132 as a 9th level wizard. That's amazing. Our AC with haste up is now 24, and with shield it's 29, right? So against our boss fight, this level, the control was a young blue dragon. We would have a 3 DTPR. We're only taking 3 damage per round on average, and our rounds to die is 44. Again, more than double the previous champ in my tank builds. The regular standard average encounter was against 4 hobgoblin captains. Our DTPR is 6, and our rounds to die is 22. Still best in class. And against a DC 15 level 5 never-ending fireball, it is 19 damage taken per round and 7 rounds to die. We're doing a smidge better than last check, thanks to the dex save from haste mostly. But the reality is, of course, when you see a fireball going out, you should counterspell that fireball and ideally take 0 damage instead of 19, right, or whatever. And that is a luxury that none of the other tank builds that I've created so far have. So, bully for you. At level 10, we are a Wizard 6, and we get an amazing Abjuration Wizard feature called Projected Ward. It's awesome. When a friend within 30 feet of us that we can see takes damage, as a reaction, we can essentially bloop, teleport our arcane ward to them and let our arcane ward absorb that damage. If the ward goes to 0, of course, then the character takes the rest of the damage. But this is exactly the kind of thing that a tank should be doing. It is delicious. And keep in mind that you now have 4th level spell slots, even though you don't yet have any 4th level spells. But of course, at level 7, we are a Wizard 7, and we get 4th level spells. A ton of great ones, I'll mention too. Banishment is a great abjuration spell that basically takes one enemy out of the fight for a whole minute if they fail their save. And polymorph, though I don't talk about it often, can be a really nice way to protect an ally by either polymorphing, the bad guy that's attacking them into a goldfish, or by turning your friend into a T-Rex or a giant ape or whatever, because they now have a bunch of extra hit points, of course, that the enemies are going to have to burn through. Both require your concentration, so use sparingly, because doing so will give up your haste, but they're great options, I think. At level 12, we're a Wizard 8, and we get another ability score increase or feat. Now that we have advantage on our dex saves, thanks to haste, I'm tempted to go Shield Master. But the reality is, we should have Counterspell up most of the time that we need it against those incoming, dex save spells. So I think I'm just not going to worry about Shield Master, even though I've been teasing it, right? If you really want it, go for it. But I think for me, I probably just as soon take Tough. That's going to bump our hit points by 2 per level, which is great. Of course, if your survivability is just not as much of a concern for you anymore, and maybe it just isn't, feel free to take, an intelligence bump here. Take your intelligence to 18, increases your plus to hit, increases the DC of your spells, right? And actually bumps your arcane ward a little bit the first time you cast it anyway. Honestly, that's probably what I would do in game if I were playing this character. But we're exploring the limits of what's possible for survivability. So I'm assuming Tough. At level 13, we are a Wizard 9, and we get 5th level spells. And 5th level spells are really powerful. In addition to the usual greats that I've already mentioned, animate objects, wall of force, etc., there are tons of fantastic spells that are great for control, for damage, for utility, and you should totally take whichever ones look the most fun and or powerful to you. Damage report. At level 13, our armor class has not changed since last time we checked, but our HP has gone up dramatically. So we have 126 regular hit points, plus 25 temporary hit points from a 5th level Armor of Agathis casting, plus 95 from your spell slots converted into Arcane Ward, for a total of 246 hit points. Yeesh. Our boss fight at this level is against an adult white dragon, and they would do 7 damage per round to us. So a 7 DTPR, and our rounds to die are 35. Against the 5 helmed horrors that were our regular, typical, normal encounter control, we take 6 damage per round. and we survive for 41 rounds at that rate. And against a DC 16 level 7 never-ending fireball, assuming you don't just counterspell it, we take 26 damage per round, and our rounds to die is 9. So we just keep living longer and longer. All right, we're coming down the home stretch here, people. Level 14, you're a wizard 10, and you get improved Abjuration from the Abjuration subclass. It's very nice, very, very nice for us. So when you cast an Abjuration spell that requires you to make an ability check as part of the spell, like when you counterspell, for example, on against a spell that's higher than the counterspell slot that you're using, right? We get to add our proficiency bonus to that intelligence check. So if an enemy wizard casts a 6th level spell and we try and counterspell it with a 3rd level spell slot, we have to make an intelligence check, DC of 16 in that case, right? Now, up until now, we only have a +3 or a +4 to that check. Now we get to add our proficiency bonus, which at this level is a 5. So now we're like at a +8 or a +9 to make that check, greatly, greatly increasing our chances to counter it. At level 15, we are a wizard 11, and we get 6th level spells. There's tons of good ones, as usual. You are a wizard after all. Globe of Invulnerability is a favorite anti-caster tank option. It's an abjuration spell. It does require concentration, but basically you put a bubble around yourself and everyone within 10 feet of you, and now spells that are 5th level or lower can't affect anyone inside the bubble, even if they upcast the spell. So Fireball is a 3rd level spell, right? Even if the spellcaster is upcasting that Fireball to 6th level, if you're inside the Globe of Invulnerability, it will have no effect on you. So who's laughing now, Endless Fireball Barrage? Good to use when up against a strong mage or a lot of casters, even though it requires concentration. Investiture of Stone, it's worth considering. Honestly, I still prefer using our concentration for haste. Investiture of Stone gives resistance to non-magical weapon damage, and it does some other cool things like knock enemies prone as an action. It lets you travel through stone as though it were air, but depending on what you're fighting, the +2 AC might be as good or close, especially because, as we've talked about, your Arcane Ward isn't going to benefit from that resistance, right? The extra, and just the extra action and movement and advantage on deck saves and things, I think makes haste the better choice here, especially since it's only a 3rd level spell slot. I'd rather save the 6th level spell slot for, Disintegrate or Chain Lightning or something personally. At level 16, you are a Wizard 12. We get our final, as far as I'm concerned anyway, ability score increase or feat. And I'd say, your choice is probably between bumping your intelligence or going Fighter Initiate here to take the defensive fighting style and bumping your armor class by 1 more. If I were playing this character in game, again, I'm probably bumping my intelligence and capping it at 20. But as usual, in the name of exploring the possible, as far as our survivability goes, we'll take the AC bump. I think we've got enough hit points at this point, and with as high as some monsters plus to hit is getting at these levels, I think we get a little more mileage out of the armor class bump. But again, the intelligence bump is not only good for our damage, but also for our counterspell check, right? And if we're more concerned about enemy casters, that might be the better option for our survivability. I'm going to assume that we took the AC bump when I'm crunching the numbers, but you do what you gotta do. At level 17, we are a Wizard 13. We have 7th level spells. They're incredibly strong. I mean, Crown of Stars is fantastic for additional concentration-free damage each round. Force Cage is one of the most powerful control spells in the game. Simulacrum is one of the most powerful spells in the game, many would argue. It lets you potentially create a copy of yourself if you have the snow or ice to do it, and a ton of gold, and 12 hours to cast it, and you're willing to risk it getting melted because it is super fragile. I don't know. I don't think it's as good as a lot of people say. Don't get mad at me. It's just very easy to kill, but of course there's ways around that. Anyway, there's all kinds of craziness you can get up to with 7th level spells. So let's do our final damage report. Our resting armor class is 25. 30 if we use shield. Our resting hit points, our natural hit points are 162, plus 35 temporary hit points if we cast Armor of Agathis as a 7th level spell. And then it's returning 35 damage every time an enemy hits you. That's a lot. I don't know that I would use a 7th level spell slot to cast Armor of Agathis because it's a 7th level spell slot, but for the sake of argument, plus up to 125 hit points for our Arcane Ward, using our spell slots for that. So for a grand total of 322 hit points, which is ludicrous. An Adult Red Dragon for our boss fight against us would be doing 13 damage per round, and our rounds to die are 25. 5 Earth Elementals is our control for our average typical fight, and our DTPR is 10, and our rounds to die is 33, and against a DC 17 Meteor Swarm, because who's going to use a 9th level spell slot for Fireball, right? So we're going big here. Meteor Swarm, which would do 40d6 of damage to us, half of that in fire, half of it in, I think, bludgeoning. I hope you make your counterspell check, because it's 83 damage per round taken and 4 rounds to die. But hey, that's as good or better than the other tank builds that we've done, outside of the Anti-Mage, of course, but they're not really a tank in any other way except for against casters specifically. And you have a decent chance to just negate it completely and thereby save your own hide and probably your entire party. So that's really good. Final thoughts. You know, we didn't even get to discuss the Abjurer's ultimate ability that they get at Wizard 14. Spell resistance, which is so good. It gives you advantage on saving throws against all spells and resistance to damage from all spells. It's ridiculously good. It would have made that Meteor Swarm much less painful, even if we failed our counterspell check, right? But it comes so late. I mean, if you were to avoid multiclassing, just to kind of try and beeline for that ability, I mean, first of all, the campaign might be over before you even get there. How many campaigns end before level 14, right? And your armor class would be so much worse that, yeah, you'd be able to laugh at all spells, but it would be difficult, I think, for me to consider that build a tank. It's just a completely different character. You know, you'd be great at standing at the back of enemy lines and maybe throwing out your ward to your friends once in a while, but you really can't stand up there, and you don't have any soft taunts, you know, ways to kind of try and encourage the enemy to attack you, things like that. You're not as durable. You still got some decent durability, but you're not nearly as durable. It's just a completely different build and a completely different character, and if it sounds fun and awesome and amazing to you, then you should absolutely play it. But I have a hard time considering that a tank in the kind of traditional sense of the word, I suppose. As for the character that we built, it is the new reigning champ of durability. And if you get to level 18, well, you'll get that awesome spell resistance feature too. But it feels practically unkillable outside of a very concerted effort of like multiple enemy spellcasters. The sustained DPR it brings isn't amazing, but none of the tank builds are. The damage you get from Armor of Agathis and the other things you have are great. You might not get quite as many soft taunts as some of the other tanks, but you have some, as well as a great and reliable way to straight up just absorb damage for an ally. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you can cast Disintegrate and Counterspell and Force Cage, so who cares? You're freaking amazing. Again, keep in mind, you are still a wizard. After all is said and done, if there's a great opportunity to, like I said, throw out a fireball or a lightning bolt or a wall of force, you absolutely should. And frankly, that's what makes this build so fun to play. You are protecting your allies, you're absorbing damage, you're drawing enemy fire, all while bringing the lightning, or locking down enemies if and when you need to. So that's the build for the week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast making it. I can't wait to hopefully play this character in game one day. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, on TikTok, and check out our subreddit. I hope that you like and subscribe and share this with your friends if you enjoyed what we put together. I think you guys are fantastic, and I love you dearly, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And I will talk to you soon.